going by the last three budgets, $604.2 million was the average fire and emergency management output of the preceding of those financial years. And your government of that spends about 6% on fuel reduction and fire breaks, according to DECA annual reports. If we're referring to budget paper 3, page 112, the fire and emergency management budget this year is only $400.6 million. So what is the direct budget for fuel reduction and fire breaks this year?
Before I get to the fuel fire breaks budget, can I just caution the committee? While it's 400 in the budget papers today, it doesn't end up. If you look at the last few years of the budget, we always exceed by some measure the expected estimated budget because of the lumpiness of how we do this work. Fundamentally, and Chris Hardman can speak further to this, but fundamentally, you from time to time you'll have better periods because of climate change and the variations of the climate, better times of the year to do fuel management, whether it be creating strategic fuel breaks, maintaining them, access roads, planned burns. So what happens is normally FFM Victoria, Vic, through me, asks the Treasurer for a Treasurer's advance. So you'll see, Ms Benham, that you'll get in the last few years, the budget that we start off with is invariably it's far higher. I think we ended up with 480 last year. It will end up with a lot more than 400 this year because of the lumpiness, the preparedness of the preparedness work, and then also the actual emergencies. So you'll find in those years where there's been storm events like in Merbau North or Grampians bushfires twice in 12 months, you have an uplift, and the FFM Vic gets more, in fact, gets the money it asks for to deal with those things. So the 400 is effectively the starting point, and then we end up with an amount higher. The other bit of the lumpiness, just the last bit of the lumpiness, is there was a big project worth 130 odd million. The DepSec will correct me, but it was basically turning, as a 5-year project, turning the analogue radio system into digital. And now that's concluded, that work's been done. So we'll end up with a figure far higher than 400.
So why not just budget for more than that rather than have to access Treasurer's advances?
Because we don't know. That's a reality. The 400 is about the kind of the midpoint between what we may need and what we've traditionally had.
But if the fuel load, if more than 6% is going into fuel reduction, because we know that that's been increasing particularly over the last 10 years, the fuel reduction really needs special attention, and the Grampians bushfires were a perfect example of that. If more of that budget was allocated to fuel reduction, surely you'd be able to get a more accurate view of what the budget should be.
I might throw to the Chris Hardman, Chief Fire Officer, but can I just, as I do, Ms Benham, have you seen the result this year though? We're going to end up with 64% risk rating as opposed to 70. The lower it is, the better it is. So obviously what we're doing is working because the fuel
74%,
reduction...
isn't it?
No, 64, yeah. Yep. Chris?
Look, I think what's really important is we actually don't know what we'll spend. It's based on the seasonal outlook. So we budget for a base level, so what we would expect for an average year, and that's around $15 million. Then we get and it's primarily the autumn seasonal outlook. And once we receive the autumn seasonal outlook from the Bureau of Meteorology and the Australian Fire Authorities Council, then we can start to evaluate the likelihood of us being able to do more planned burning. And so last year, for instance, we felt we could deliver an additional $14.5 million. This year, we felt we could do more, so we sought an additional $23.5 million. And again, we will evaluate that on an annual basis based on the climate seasonal outlook, and we try and maximise the number of burns we do at any given time.
So given that we know that there is, the weather patterns and things, you would expect though that you would need to do, and the Grampians has been burnt now anyway, but you would expect that the seasonal outlook is going to get worse and worse each year.
Yeah, if I can, just not necessarily. So the last 3 years, for instance, we had a La Nina event, which meant that we had a wetter than average season. Then these years are drier than average, so it is variable. But I have to say, planned burning doesn't stop bushfires. The Grampians have had a really significant fire history that we've applied in the landscape, and it had lots of benefits. Halls Gap was saved because of a planned burn that the fire ran into.
Okay, thank you. Speaking of the Grampians, it burned 135,000 hectares, 4 homes, 41 buildings, 540 kilometres of fencing, and massive livestock deaths and severe impacts on local businesses because people couldn't visit or felt like they couldn't visit. Do you accept that the Safer Together policy ministers failed the Grampians and put lives and livelihoods at risk?
I'd say the exact opposite. I think-
Exact opposite.
Yeah, Ms. Benham, and I mean this sincerely, I have met many of the business owners of the residents in Grampians. I've been to Grampians, I think, 14 times in the last 12 months. And I'll speak with some authority. These people have done extraordinarily tough over 2 fires in 12 months. But I think they also acknowledge that the preparatory work by Chris Hardman's team, FFM Vic, the response on the actual emergency response by FFM Vic, CFA and SES has been unparalleled. Like, we are talking about moderate, small property loss. Like, it could have been far worse. And I think Chris Hardman's point, Chief Fire Officer's point about the planned burns the preparation work we'd done previously, having genuinely, I mean, it's hard to prove the counterfactual, but genuinely stopped what could have been a much bigger fire, I think is true and resonates here. And can I tell you, just as a measure of that, is the shifts worked by FFM Vic in 24-25 financial year were only 15% lower than the shifts worked in the Black Saturday bushfires. That's how much support and funding FFM Vic have received. In fact, even more than that, the aviation hours flown by FFM Vic for this last financial year we're in is on par, comparable to the Black Saturday. So FFM Vic receive all the funding they require every time they ask for it.
Thank you, Minister.